This is Jonas. When cleaning his room, he found a 2 D-Mark coin. He still remembers buying his sweets with D-Mark at the corner store when he was younger. Nowadays, he pays everything with euros. But why is that? Well, we have to elaborate a little to explain this. Some time ago, Italy, for example, used the lira. France used the franc. And Germany, its Deutschmark. As early as in 1992, in the Maastricht Treaty, the founding members of the European Union decided to set up the European Central Bank in order to establish a common European currency. Thus, the European Monetary Union was introduced. Upon uniting the currency, the value of the money and products is preserved. If you had 20 Deutschmarks of pocket money before the introduction of the euro, for example, they would then be worth the equivalent of around 10 euros. Those countries that wanted to instate the euro had to, and still have to, comply with 4 criteria of convergence. 1 year before joining the shared currency, the concerned country has to verify stable prices. That is to say, the rate of inflation must not exceed 1.5% of the 3 most stable countries' inflation rate. Government bonds, this is something similar to a loan taken by the state and bought by investors, need to verify low interest rates. 1 year before joining the currency, the long-term interest rates that the state guarantees on its loans must not be higher than 2% of the other 3 states' interest rates. Furthermore, the state's finances have to be solid. Governmental debt has to be below 60% of the gross domestic product. The rate of new debt made every year should not exceed 3% of the GDP. Last but not least, the joining country has to prove a stable exchange rate for the past 2 years. This rate is calculated using the European exchange rate mechanism, introduced in 1999. At the dawn of the Monetary Union on the 1st of January 1999, 11 countries met these criteria. They were later joined by Greece. On January 1st of 2002, the old currencies were outdated, and the euro introduced as the sole currency. In 2015, 19 countries were already part of the Monetary Union and exchanged their former currency for euros. But what about the other countries in the European Union? Some of them have yet to meet the relevant criteria before being able to join the Monetary Union. Some have deliberately chosen to keep their own currency. There have been many advantages to the introduction of the euro. For example, not needing to exchange money when traveling within European countries. But there are also a few detriments. Think about the term euro crisis. This will be the topic of our next clip, so stay tuned. Back to Jonas and his Deutschmark coin. He exchanges it for a euro at the local national bank. And just like in good old times, he heads to the corner store to buy himself some sweets.
God, that's bad.
When the euro was introduced on January 1st, 2002, many things changed for Jonas. Today, he has gotten used to the new currency. He thinks the advantages are numerous. His friend Rocco from Italy, however, does not agree with everything concerning the euro and the transnational currency merger. They agree on several things. When traveling to other countries that use the euro, they don't need to exchange their money and can pay everything with euros. This is convenient for both of them. Online shopping has also become easier for customers and producers. There is no exchange rate, and financial transactions cost the same as national transactions. Generally speaking, prices and salaries can be compared on a European scale more easily. This enhances the competition among companies and benefits the customers. The countries sharing one currency also need to collaborate more closely with each other. They grow closer and can support each other during difficult times. Well, in theory, that is. The European Central Bank's main goal is the preservation of stable prices within the EU. That sounds lovely in theory, but Rocco tells Jonas about the disadvantages as well. Those mechanisms benefiting one country might, for example, hurt another one. This mainly concerns economic and financial problems of the participating countries and their inhabitants. Countries give up part of their control and parts of their governmental autonomy. Before the introduction of the euro, they could help themselves first in difficult times. To stimulate economic growth, they could print more money or devaluate their currency. Selling cheaper products was thus possible, and more products were being exported to other countries. The tourism industry would experience growth, providing cheap vacations. Since the currency is now the same in all countries, all of this is no longer possible for struggling countries. As a matter of fact, not every country complied with the Mutual Stability Pact, which led to shortages in the national budget and rising debt. They had to get expensive loans with high interest rates to close this financial gap. Investors are now concerned the pending bankruptcy of one country could influence all other euro states. This is called the euro crisis. To prevent this from happening, the European Central Bank has implemented several solutions. The ECB buys government bonds of indebted European countries for low interest rates to offer those countries cheap loans. A debt limit for all members was installed. Moreover, fines are automatically due if a country does not abide by the criteria of the Mutual Stability Pact. However, these measures have yet to be met and controlled. Whether they stabilize the union has yet to be proven. Jonas and Rocco have different opinions on this issue, but they still remain friends. Next summer, they decided to travel to Latvia, which they always wanted to see. And there, they can pay with euros too. For more information about the introduction of the euro, check out our video clip, The European Monetary Union Explained.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so today is our short class, and I wanted to show that subsidiarity short clip because next week you're going to start reading about regional actors, provinces, and the regional powers, governments, and actors within the European Union nation states. And the topic for this week continues to be the European Union, Europeanization of European Union policy. And before I forget, I want to make sure we go to cyber attendance. So we go to smart attendance, and you can see, what did I just do there? Okay, start attendance under week 12. And so you can see your number is 174. 174 is your cyber attendance number, 174. So let me go back to the Zoom meeting here, and without accidentally closing the Zoom class. So the number is 174, send that out. Okay, so, and then back to the notes and Europeanization and the notes on European Union member states. So the Europeanization is another word for European integration. And so as we try to consider what Europeanization means in terms of its real substance, again, with this notion of underpinning our discussion about the extent to which we see that European integration is encouraging people to continue to be cooperative, to reduce suspicion and paranoia and hostility that feeds upon itself in an interactive way, as we're seeing, for example, in the last class, we highlighted the news report about the conflict now between British fishermen and French fishermen around the island of Jersey off the coast of France that still is part of the British sovereign area, that without the European Union institutions and European Union competencies, which has been your topic, of course, for this week in your paragraphs, will the European Union become more and more involved in more and more areas of policy making? And that's the term competency is a legal term. It just means, is the European Union legally permitted to engage in policy making that makes public policy regarding fisheries or agriculture or cultural policy or foreign policy or different aspects of foreign policy? So it's a legal term in European Union terminology that refers to whether or not the European Union is legally permitted. And in those areas in which the European Union is not legally permitted, then the member states and the other actors, including the provinces and localities, are supposed to take responsibility for that. That's that principle of subsidiarity. That principle of subsidiarity holds that the European Union principle is that the smallest or lowest level of government must address the policy, should address the policy, and the European Union only gains more competency, more powers, and more competencies if that adds more value, and meaning improving the policy and therefore the quality of life of the citizens of the European Union. That European Union is brought in if the meeting the objectives of France or Spain or Italy, Italy for its people is improved through cooperation, coordination, collaboration at the European Union level. And so that is the bringing together all of these notions of what Europeanization means. So it's a principle that is also very sensitive to the continuing importance in people's thinking and people's expectations within Europe regarding the role of the national government, right? Remember, I keep coming to this point that it's easy for people like you and me who spend so much of our time and energy studying the European Union to just assume unconsciously that most people are like that. And most people's lives are not focused upon the European Union, even when they need something from the government, when they need something from for example, they need a marriage license to get married, or they need to buy property, they want to buy an apartment. The European Union is not involved in that, right? The European Union is not typically involved when they pay their taxes in Germany or Italy or Spain. That's not something that the European Union is something that is in their evident experience. But even though everybody engages in that, everybody has to pretty much, pay taxes, or has to, at one point, wants to buy property. They're not going to be involved in the European Union. So the European Union is something which, again, is a focus of the study of this textbook and of this chapter. And as we got the sense from last week's readings, it's a very elite-focused enterprise, an elite-led project. And periodically you see these backlashes, these uprisings of Euroscepticism against it, because they're always competing, in part because there's always competing political elites who are ambitious career politicians themselves, who are seeking political power, and they know that their people, like everybody knows, that their people in France or in Italy and Germany, the typical citizen is nationalistic. And that means, as we defined it, they're concerned about maintaining and protecting the sovereignty of the nation. And these demagogues in everywhere, they're in all countries, and particularly nation states, are looking to appeal to that tendency towards suspicion to perceive threats to sovereignty. And of course, the European Union is the logical target for that. It's the logical focus for that, because it has its own institutions. It has European Union institutions that are supranational, like the European Parliament or the European Commission. So this Europeanization process is a complex, challenging notion that is very elite focused, which is very much focused upon this drive to add value for the well-being of the citizens of France, Germany, and Italy, as they understand it, as they perceive it. Not everybody, but the typical citizen, as reflected, for example, in election outcomes, that Europeanization has to somehow appear to add on to promoting the well-being of the citizens of France and of Italy and of Germany and of all the member states. So, and so it is something like a minefield, in the military, where, on the DMZ, the militaries plant mines, right? You have to be very careful where you walk. And so, or else the mine may blow up and the mine is hidden. And the same is true regarding Europeanization, right? So I have to make sure that we share the screen on Europeanization. And so we go to the notes on share screen. And so the concepts of Europeanization includes, and again, in this elite-driven project, Europeanization consists of processes of construction, diffusion, and institutionalization of formal and informal rules, procedures, policy paradigms, styles, ways of doing things, and shared beliefs and norms. And this is, again, among the policy-making, decision-making elites, right? The people that are involved in governance, in a day-to-day activity, right? Which is, not so much focused upon changing the mass public's identity, right? That's not typically what we're referring to here. Or changing, for example, cultural expectations. Like the European Union has been hesitant, for example, to get involved in cultural issues, although it is starting to. Like, for example, for the longest time, if you took a European Union class, the European Union textbook that you were using would say that the European Union does not get involved in sensitive cultural issues, like, for example, whether or not abortion should be legal or not in a member state. And the examples would be, for example, Ireland. Ireland's been a member of the European Union since 1973. Its Catholic identity is very much part of Irish nationalist identity. And so for the longest time, for decades, abortion was illegal in Ireland, until there was a scandal several years ago when an Indian Irish person, a person from India who migrated to Ireland, got pregnant, and her pregnancy failed, and she could not get an abortion even though she was under health threat, because the baby, I think the fetus had died. And she could not get the abortion in Ireland because the doctors were afraid that that they would be committing a crime. And so that she couldn't get an abortion, and she died. The doctor herself, who was pregnant, the female doctor who had immigrated to India to Ireland from India, got pregnant, needed an abortion for her own health and could not get it, and she died. And so there was this big push that finally resulted just a couple years ago in Ireland legalizing abortion. And now, so the European Union also is talking all the time about women's rights. And so it's difficult to talk about women's rights if you don't also eventually, sooner or later, get around to this notion of should women have legal access to abortion. And so the European Union tiptoes, it's a minefield, right? This neo-functionalist expansion of spillover, if you're going to talk about women's liberation to be able to function in the labor market, then you have to start talking about childcare, providing childcare services for women, and then you also have to talk about what do you do with women who are pregnant but don't want to miss work, or don't, and so it becomes sensitive topics. So this is those are issues of legitimacy of public discourse, but here the focus is upon how policymakers in Ireland, Germany, France, and Italy and Bulgaria learn from each other, and the European Union frameworks that promote national member states learning from each other. Europeanization are first defined and consolidated in the EU policy process and then incorporated in the logic of domestic political structures and public policy. So the European Union adopts policies, whether it be regulations and directives, but they still rely upon the Italians and the French and the Germans to implement those directives and incorporate those directives and implement those regulations. And there's an Italian way of doing that, and a German way of doing that, and a French way of doing that. So as they learn from each other, they're not going to just copy the way the French do it to apply to Italy. They're going to watch the way the French do it. They're going to learn from the way the French do it, and then they're going to modify and change it to the Italian way of doing things. So this definition of Europeanization highlights three particular features of Europeanization. It originates in different stages and forms of the policy process in terms of policy formulation, embedding into practice, institutionalization, and in a much less structured manner, diffusion. And then they make these, so in formulating policy, whether it be on the national level, and not to mention on the European Union level, there is this incorporation of Europeanization into national policymaking processes, as well as into the European Union level of policymaking. And Europeanization, as I said, involves the adaptation and reform and modification of the French way or the Italian way or the Greek way of doing things to the expectations of the European Union as expressed and articulated by European Union representatives, European Union officials, and other European Union member states. But still, it's a process that's incorporated and embedded by the national member states and their cultures and their political systems themselves. So, it incorporates not simply formal rules about a way by which you go about making policy, but, for example, notions of beliefs, values, and norms. Tolerance is one of these norms. The need for dialogue. The European Union is slow. I mean, when the European Union is going to decide something, it takes more time. As we saw, for example, in the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, the European Union, in the face of the European Commission, was slower in negotiating purchase contracts for the AstraZeneca and Pfizer Moderna vaccines because it's a group of member states, 27 member states. So it works by consensus, right? It can't force member states to do things. It has to talk to them. It has to persuade them. And so it is going to be slower. And it's got to be slow because the danger of acting quickly and very fast is it's possible unintentionally to instigate and intensify latent hidden suspicions that say the European Union is basically working for Germany, or the European Union institutions work for Germany and France at the expense of the well-being of weaker states and smaller states, or of Italy. And so they have to be very concerned about not appearing to, even if they do not intend to impose the will of the big powerful countries on the weaker and smaller countries. And that means they have to, even if it's not intended, if you act too quickly, if you're Germany, for example, you just go ahead and approve the COVID-19 vaccine from Pfizer, then what does that mean? If you did not at least consult with the Bulgarians, the Greeks, the Croatians, the Estonians, the Latvians, you got to consult with them. You've got to have consensus. That means you have to talk, and you're talking all of the time to all of these other countries, big and small. Whereas, of course, if you're Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party leader in Great Britain, you just don't have to talk to anybody. You just talk to yourself, right? Your own people. So Europeanization, this notion of beliefs, values, and norms, it doesn't mean that there's one European way, standard way about, for example, carrying out macroeconomic policy changes in your country, or carrying out privatization of state-owned enterprises. No. That's too specific. It's more an attitude towards orientation, towards interacting with the other member states in order to consult, communicate, collaborate, and cooperate in core and growing policy areas. And the European Union institutions, when they get involved, when the Commission gets involved, when the European Parliament gets involved, then we start talking about European Union competencies, right? Because it's a legal term. It means formal legal recognition that the European Union is supposed to be involved in that particular area, even if it is not 100% in control. For example, the European Union has total competency over agricultural policy. Supposedly, the European Union has complete competency in dealing with agricultural policy and international trade negotiations. Okay, but it has partial competency, for example, or shared competency in dealing with other policy areas. In other words, the national government and the European Union institutions are involved. But aside from that formal legal competency, that formal legal recognition of policy involvement of the European Union level institutions, the Commission, the European Central Bank, all of those European Union institutions, still there's also an aspect of Europeanization that involves basically the more informal methods that interact with the formal methods of coordination, collaboration, cooperation, and openness to showing you what I'm doing, and I can look in your country and see what you're doing, and you accept that I have the right to do that, and I accept that you have the right to look at inside my country, and not only to look, to comment on what I'm doing, to give me your opinion. And I am institutionally obligated to be more open and tolerant to that, because we're all part of the European Union. The British have said no through Brexit. We don't want that much involvement of outside actors in our internal policy making in the United Kingdom. We don't want that anymore. Now, they can still, those people, other actors can still comment and make, the diplomatic term in French is démarche, issue démarches about, we don't like what London is doing with regard to Northern Ireland or to Scotland. But the point is that Britain leaving the European Union and no longer legally recognizes the right of Rome, Paris, Berlin, the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, the European Parliament, to comment and observe and critique as a legal right what is going on inside Britain. Okay, so that goes back to that notion that we covered at the beginning of the semester, that European integration, Europeanization has changed member states insofar as supposedly, according to chapter 1 of the book, that now the legitimization or the gaining of legitimacy and acceptance as liberal, democratic, appropriate policy by a member state's government in its public policy includes not only obtaining legitimacy from the public of Germany towards the German government, or the public of Italy towards the Italian government, but also in terms of getting feedback and acceptance from the other member states of the European Union. And London has rejected that with Brexit. That's what Brexit means. We no longer legally accept that we are legally obligated to allow you to have a right to involvement in our internal affairs. Other Europeans. So Europeanization involves two steps. It involves adoption at the European Union level. So the European Union often does adopt policies, right, through the ordinary legislative procedure in which the European Commission makes a formal proposal for legislation. Then the Council of Ministers of the European Union and the European Parliament both debate and attempt to amend and agree, and then they approve by majority voting with some qualifications on the final draft of that legislation. And then if that legislation is adopted, it's adopted by the European Union institutions, and then it has to be incorporated at the domestic level by Croatia, Slovenia, Estonia, Italy, Germany, Portugal, all of the member states, and they do it in the way that they do it. Even though they're all thinking, we want to be Europeans, we're good Europeans, we're good Europeans. Hey, Spain, I'm here, Portugal. We're trying to implement this policy that you implemented last year. Let me see how you did it, because, you know, we're pretty close, and, you know, we even can understand each other in Portuguese and Spanish. Okay, that's informal, but that's encouraged, and that's even openly encouraged, right? I mean, the European Union likes to legalize as much as it can the actual practices and behaviors you see being shown within the European Union. So they adopted something officially called the open method of coordination. It's informal, it's recognition of informal borrowing and observation of each other's efforts to implement Europeanization, and say, and be open to and legally recognize that we have the right to look at, see, and comment and borrow from each other. The open method of coordination, OMC. So consequently, European Union policymaking, when you go through the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers with the European Commission first proposing a proposal, and Europeanization are distinct from each other, because Europeanization is occurring at the member state level. And that's why you're going to read about the subnational provinces of the European Union, because, you know, they play some degree of important role in how the member states actually implement the European Union policy directives and regulations that were adopted. And you know, again, there's that important informal subtext of the whole book that, you know, are we creating a European identity? Are we intensifying that identity? Can that European identity become bigger and broader and even more important maybe someday than German, Italian, French, Greek, Bulgarian, Estonian identity, and so on? And of course, it didn't work so far in Brexit. So in Britain. So this chapter considers both Europeanization as impact as well as its broader notions. So in defining public policy in the European Union case, we should not define as what governments do, but because the EU is not a government. And then Rodelli goes on, Rodelli, the author, defines public policy as a course of action or inaction, interaction patterns characterized among interdependent actors. So policymaking is about making or not making decisions, because you can make a choice not to do something. And if you choose not to do something, then that's a policy, because you chose not to do something. So if you choose not to engage in, what do you choose not to? If you choose not to regulate financial markets, then that's favoring liberalization or neoliberal public policies, right? So the process through which social actors develop their own understandings of what they are doing in their relationship with the rest of the world, again, this is what public policy is about. So now we start talking about understandings, right? And there's a French way of understanding, and an Italian way, and a Bulgarian way, and a Latvian way of understanding. Because, you know, culture is something which is something which nations develop. So what is a culture? Something you are learned after you are born by your early socialization. Includes language, right, is the most blatant manifestation of that, and other aspects of culture, from food to clothing, but it also includes attitudes and orientations towards how you interact with each other, what's the right and wrong way of behaving, or at least the ideals. Because we can say a good American or a good Korean or a good Italian never lies, but we all sooner or later engage in lies. But we have an ideal that we should not lie, right? So, and those ideals are important because they become sources of symbols. What's the ideal perfect Italian? What's the ideal perfect Korean? What's the ideal perfect Chinese? And if I'm a political figure, a politician seeking to get you to vote for me or support me, I'm going to tell you that I'm going to work to promote those perfect German or Italian or French ideals. If I'm a nationalist, whether it be a liberal nationalist or a conservative right-wing populist nationalist. And now we're talking about nationalism, because my mentor, he briefly said to me, that in his theory of nationalism that he developed, he was trying to, apply culture to the study of international politics and international relations. And what it involves is this notion of celebrating culture and saying that our culture should be dominant because the way we Germans do things is better than anybody else. And we want you, the French and the Italians, to recognize it. And how are we going to make you recognize it? We'll beat you on the battlefield, like the way Germany under Hitler celebrated the defeat of France in 1940, right? We showed we're better. That's ugly, but that's the authoritarian element of nationalism. European Union tends to want to associate nationalism because it's always there and you have to deal with it with liberal values. So, but you got to be careful. It's a minefield, right? So Europeanization is about policy change responding to EU pressure and incentives and the production of meanings. God, what does that mean? The production of meanings. Oh, again, this psychological, social psychological reference that needs to be developed. And I think we can develop it. I think we can, right? So in sum, Europeanization is here about the structural, relational, cognitive dimensions of, oh my gosh, the structural and cognitive dimensions of policy. And so, yeah, well, so I think we might have already covered some of this last week. So Europeanization therefore functions through compliance mechanisms, the structural dimension. I mean, there is a monitoring political role of the European Commission. The European Commission will say, hey, you Italians, you might have your Italian way of doing things, but you're not doing what you need to be doing. So we're going to sue you. We're going to take you before the European Court of Justice because the European Union adopted a directive that you're supposed to reduce pesticide use in your agriculture by 30% in 10 years, and you haven't reduced your use of pesticides by 30%. And I know there are reasons why you haven't, and the problems, but and there's an Italian explanation, but the fact is you haven't done it, so we're going to sue you before the European Court of Justice. So you find lots of cases like that where the European Commission is monitoring and saying, okay, you have the French or Italian or Bulgarian way of doing things, but you still have to do it. How you do it is up to you, but just do it. And you're not doing it, whatever it happens to be. Social meanings and representations, the cognitive dimension, we already talked about that. Yeah, so I think framing this through discourse. So I think we covered a lot of this. Well, maybe we didn't. I mean, it's repeated in this. So any European Union policy agenda, such as intra-EU migrations, regulatory competition, or race to the bottom claims, are partly real-world political phenomena and also partly a cognitive feature or aspect of how these phenomena are framed or interpreted through a discourse. So, yeah, I mean, that notion of discourse is important because it means you're trying to persuade people to act in certain ways, to think in certain ways, and therefore to act in certain ways. And that means to get them to tolerate certain things, to be excited about doing certain things, and then, if you're going to talk about, you can't understand public opinion unless you understand nationalism. I mean, that's why we keep talking about nationalism, because you can't understand public opinion unless you understand nationalism. So you have to understand Europeanization in relation to German nationalism, French nationalism, Italian nationalism, Bulgarian nationalism, and British nationalism. And British nationalism reacted much more vigorously against Europeanization so far than we've seen the other member states. And so I know nationalism doesn't explain everything. And I know this is very important, right? Money is very important for explaining political behavior. I know that. But those of you who think that, that politics and Europeanization and Korean foreign policy is all about this, you need to explain Brexit. Then you need to explain how Brexit happened, because most of the big money in Britain did not want Britain to leave the European Union, but they left anyway. The big capitalists, the big companies did not want to leave the European Union. So despite all of their public relations firms and their advertising budgets and their support for pro-European Union policies, they were not able to persuade enough people to vote against leaving. But having said that, I know this is very important. This is very important in politics. I know that, you know that. So that leads to the next in-class exercise. And since we only have 20 minutes left in class, let me stop share and go back to the, if I can, to the, okay, and I think I probably have to log out. Well, maybe not. Let me see, let's go to the vote. And let's see if you can see that. And, oh yeah, I guess you can still see that. So to set this up, nationalism and the challenge of nationalism. So let me open up a little exercise to get us thinking about this. I keep talking about Marine Le Pen and the National Rally. And I keep talking about Marine Le Pen and the National Rally, partly because the media is talking a lot about her, because they know what you and I know, that she is probably going to do better next year in French elections than she did last year. And she was during the 2017 elections, I should say. And so again, we see here another article in the New York Times regarding Marine Le Pen. Is she going to be the French version of Donald Trump? Is she going to win in next election in 2022? And if she does win, is she going to be the French Boris Johnson? Is she going to take France out of the European Union? And so this article, and it's a long article, so I'm not going to go through it here. And she has gotten some support from some rich industrialists in France. It says here, Mr. de Kersalson, who is evidently somebody well known in business circles in France, a former senior executive of the telecommunications giant Alcatel, is supporting Miss Marine Le Pen's national rally. And again, a year before France's next presidential election, Mr. Marine Le Pen, 52, is expected to be President Emmanuel Macron's main challenger in a rematch of the 2017 vote. For the past 4 years, Ms. Le Pen has been trying to rebuild her credibility following a poor campaign that was marred by an incoherent message and punctuated by a disastrous debate against Mr. Macron in 2017. I remember that she appeared unable to articulate her points. She has tweaked her economic message today in 2021, shedding the party's opposition to the euro and the European Union, a stance that alienated mainstream conservatives. She now talks of forming a government of national unity by picking the most competent, seasoned individuals, including figures from the left, who would add gravitas to a party whose vice president, Jordan Bardella, is only 25 years old. I think some of you in the class are about 25 years old. So she's trying to appeal to the youth movement, to the youth, which is, of course, supposedly one of the foundational constituencies for the European Union and Europeanization. So even as she hews to the party's harsh nationalist anti-immigrant vision, and that's her main meat issue, I mean, they're not going to give that up, Ms. Le Pen has redoubled efforts to undemonize her party, which has long been associated with anti-Semitism, xenophobia, Holocaust denialism, and colonial nostalgia of Jean-Marie Le Pen, her father and her party's founder, and the party's founder. It's possible she'll earn good results in the first round, maybe even come in first, and then lose in the second round, Mr. Lebrug said, adding that this is some French analyst Who knows if he's right? Adding that her perceived strong showing owed less to her charisma than pessimism in France. It's more about the French fear of decline. Yeah, I mean, my impression is that Donald Trump generated more positive charisma because he portrayed himself as one of the world's most successful businessmen. And he was a billionaire, right? Marine Le Pen, she's the daughter of the founder. She doesn't have that charisma that Donald Trump had, rightly or wrongly. Americans love businessmen. They think businessmen supposedly self-made. I mean, I know it's all a lie, and I know he wasn't self-made, but he marketed himself as being a self-made businessman. So again, we're talking about American nationalism, which is different from French nationalism in terms of the symbol sets, the culture, and the ideal typical representations. So you got to be an expert on nationalism, which means you have to be an expert on France versus an expert on Great Britain versus an expert on Italy versus an expert on Greece versus an expert on Bulgaria. If you want to understand how these countries behave in the European Union and their engagement in Europeanization. So the government's poor handling of the coronavirus pandemic has undermined faith in the state and deepened a sense of general national decline. She has shed part of her populist economic agenda, especially a proposal to drop the euro. So she's no longer saying that. Remember, Britain was never in the Eurozone. Britain never joined the euro, even though Tony Blair, the British Labour Prime Minister, wanted to join, they never joined. France is, of course, in the Eurozone. She said she now believed that the stability offered by the common currency outweighed the negatives. Keeping the currency's belief to help Ms. Le Pen court traditional conservatives, the same group targeted by Mr. Macron. It's reassured people who were worried by a position that made them think that it could have consequences on their assets, she said. Again, that's, I don't really know who's speaking there. So, but she's still focused on immigration. And that was the main issue not the only, but one of the main issues in Brexit, right? In the interview, Ms. Le Pen's voice rose when she spoke about immigration, the red meat issue that has sustained her party's rise under both father and daughter. She said government policies were too lax in immigration for a fragmenting French society and giving rise to Islamism and terrorism. So please respond to the following statement. A European Union member state that joins the Eurozone is for all intents and purposes politically locked in the European Union forever. In other words, even if Marine Le Pen wins next year, France is not going to leave the European Union. A member state, and there's only 19 countries in the Eurozone. Out of the 27 remaining, only 19 are in, right? Poland is not in, Czech Republic is not in, Hungary is in. Bulgaria is not in, Romania is not yet in, although they desperately want to be in. So how do you respond to that statement? So we stop share, and then we go back to share screen again, and we go back to the please, because we have to go to our debate. So please vote. Do you agree with that statement? That a country that joins the European Union is locked in the European Union forever? So we'll just devote half a minute to that. So 15 seconds. You strongly agree, neutral. 15 seconds. We're all tied up. Who's going to break the tie? So you cannot agree. Okay, I mean, it would be massively disruptive to France if it left the Eurozone. I'm not an economist, but it would be massively economically disruptive if France left the Eurozone, or any country leaves the Eurozone. Even little Greece would leave the Eurozone. And you know, the Germans came up, and mostly the Germans came up with 300 billion euros to allow little Greece to stay in the Eurozone. Now you could say maybe Italy is more of the problem, that Italy might default on its debt, or would it default on its? I don't know. I mean, I just think that even the European Central Bank is saying nobody's going to leave the Eurozone if they don't want to. We will continue to make sure that they're able to sell bonds, to get loans from the financial markets. We'll just print money. will print euros to buy the bonds of Italy or France or Greece or Bulgaria. Well, they're not in the Eurozone yet, but we'll print money to buy those bonds. So they'll always have access to euros to cover their budget deficits. And that was under Mario Draghi, who was the European Central Bank. He made that announcement. He didn't put it that way. He just said the European Central Bank will do whatever it takes to keep a country in the Eurozone. It was called Mario Draghi's Big Bazooka. In other words, we will print euros to buy bonds. So you'll be able to sell your bonds. And now Mario Draghi is now Prime Minister of Italy. Okay, so of course in our short class, we keep running out of time here. So we need to go to our debate. And so our debate is, you wrote your paragraphs on this topic. Will the European Union gain competency over all policy areas? So please vote on whether or not the European Union will gain competency over all policy areas. In other words, it doesn't mean full competency. It doesn't mean, it means maybe shared competency. But like I already said, I mean, you can see the European Union is beginning to talk about, well, if we're going to talk about women's rights, it's pretty hard not eventually sooner or later to talk about whether or not a woman should have legal access to abortion. Particularly now that, but they're very sensitive to this. Obviously, these politicians in the European Union are very careful about this. So they're not going to try to impose European Union policy, European Union views about abortion on Ireland. But I mean, you can't, it's something so sensitive, right? But let's take taxation. They're already talking about taxation. That used to be, oh no, several years ago, as recently as 5 years ago, if you took a European Union course, taxation policy was not an area in which European Union had competency. Now you see the European Commission criticizing Ireland and Luxembourg and Netherlands for taxation rates on corporations that's too low. That's unfair subsidies, state aid, unfair state aid to attract investment in Ireland or Luxembourg from international corporations like Apple, because Ireland is charging, I heard this morning, 12.5%. Ireland's corporate taxation rate is 12.5%. In the United States, I think it's 28% or 25%. It's so low, and the European Commission issued a warning a year or two ago, or demand to Apple that it pay an additional $13 billion in taxes that it avoided paying by constituting on paper a subsidiary in Ireland so it could take advantage of Ireland's low taxation rate. So here you see, what I'm saying is, here you see European Union officials in the form of commission members, Ms. Vestager, now talking about, hey, Ireland, your taxation policies are not good and you should change them. They didn't do that 5 years ago. Now they're doing it, right? I mean, I can show you the reports, right? I can show you the reports here. I have somewhere because I have too many things to show you. I think I have it here where, well, I have it somewhere. I have to look for it. I thought I had it where basically the European Union and member states. So here's and of course this is also part of a general European and American move to try to come up with a common corporate taxation rate. So here you see the United States is pushing the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development to come to an agreement that South Korea, France, Canada, Chile, all the countries that belong to the OECD would agree that corporations would all minimum taxation would be 15%, if not higher. And so, but we need to go to our debate. And so we'll come back to that later. And so let me stop the share and go back to our debate. And so have you see how you voted here on the question. And so we are now, time's up. So 3 are Khan. You think that, so Khan wins. All right, so that you don't think the European Union will eventually move into all policy areas, legally recognized as having a legal responsibility for all policy areas. All right, so let's stop that share, and then let's go into breakout rooms, rooms of two rooms, and let's put the person at the bottom. The last name at the bottom of each group will be the chairperson. And so that's Chung Min Ju and Chung Song Hyun. All right, Chung Min Ju for group 1 and Chung Song Hyun for group 2, room 2. So please come up with a statement. Chung Min Ju, give feedback to Chung Min Ju in group 1, room 1, and in room 2, please give feedback to Chung Song Hyun. And you have 2 minutes. Chung Min Ju, where are you? Chung Min Ju. So about a minute and a half. Why did you, what do you think? The European Union will eventually gain competency in all policy areas in the future? "45 seconds, more or less."
Professor,
Yeah.
can you send me back to the breakout room?
Who are you?
I'm Sok Ju Yun.
You want to go back? What do you want to do? Song Ju Yoon.
Sok Ju Yun, Sok Ju.
Oh,
I think I am released from the breakout room.
I don't see you here. Let me see. I mean, you're in the, I don't see you listed.
Oh, can't you see the person that having the profile photo?
I mean, I see you there. You're talking, but how can you not be in a group?
I don't know, but
Okay, you're in group.
suddenly I am
You're in room 1, right? You want to be in room 1. You're in room 1, right?
Yeah, but I think the time is up.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, so let's hear what you have to say. And okay, let me see. Flip a coin. And heads is group 1, and it's group 1. So Chung Min Ju, what is your group statement about whether or not you think European Union is going to eventually gain competency in all policy areas?
So we said that because we all disagree with the statement because first there was an opinion that it's actually impossible for every single EU policy to be implemented in every EU member state because every nation have their own identity characteristics and they have to, I guess, follow their own policies that's suitable for their own country, not as an EU member states. So there was an opinion that it's actually impossible for EU to implement all the policies into every single member state.
You know, that's really interesting. I mean, abortion, that's a really sensitive topic. That's about nationalism and culture and the way Ireland and Poland and, you know, but the European Union is pushing for LGBTQ rights, that gay people should be allowed to marry each other. Now you can say that's also as controversial as abortion. Well, maybe not. You know, people don't care if 2 men want to get married, you know, but then you start talking about using explosive language like killing an unborn baby. Ah! You know that but the European Union is openly saying, you know, all the member states should allow countries to have LGBTQ rights, including the right to marriage. Even though that's a very sensitive cultural issue, right? Particularly in these Catholic countries like Poland. Okay, and Chung Song Hyun, what did your group come up with?
Well, our group leans towards con as well. We took into thought about your feedback they gave to our paragraphs, saying that you know, the European Union is enlarging, it is encroaching more rights towards, it's getting more and more competency. Yes, but you also said something about like how it's like United States of America, how Europe could federalize in a way, but that's not likely at all. That's what we think. Like there's nationalism, there's encroaching into the rights of each member state. I mean, the United States of America was able to federalize because the whole majority and the whole powerful group, the white English group, that they all have a similar identity. So it's easier to unite them. But Europe, there's Italians, there's French, not including the British as well. So we don't really think that, you know, they're going to see eye to eye with a United States of Europe or whatnot.
Okay, I don't have a complete answer as to when that will happen. I mean, of course, the United States fought a civil war to keep the South in the Union, but the European Union didn't invade Britain to keep Britain in the European Union. Nobody's going to invade anybody else anymore. That's done since 1945, right? With nuclear weapons, that's it. It'll end civilization. So we'll see what happens in the future with Britain. Okay, well, that's all for today. Thank you very much for the stimulating 50 minutes. I mean, like I said, I get a lot of insights from talking with you, even if it's for a short time. So I will post the recording on the website. All right? Talk to you later. Bye.
See you Monday.